Welcome to the final session of today's conference, Bringing Truth and Compassion to the Transgenderism Debate. Our aim over the next half hour is to examine what the voices in our culture are saying about transgenderism and to respond to the confusion and deception around us with clarity, truth, and compassion on the basis of God's Word. For this panel discussion, our earlier speakers have returned to the stage. Pastor Jonathan Connor, the author of the Creation Foundation, Truth that Equips Parents, Pastors, and Educators to Respond to Today's Woke Worldview. Dr. Beverly Yahnke, the Executive Director for Christian Care at Doxology, the Lutheran Center for Spiritual Care and Counsel. And also Mrs. Joy Pullmann, the Executive Editor at The Federalist. I'm going to begin with an initial question myself, but I invite you already to start lining up at the microphone if you have a question as well. And my lead question is really a continuation of our last session. So to recap all three presentations, something in common here. Pastor Connor, you spoke of speaking God's good words. And Dr. Yahnke, you urged that we used biologically and medically appropriate terminology. Finally, Mrs. Pullmann, in your online magazine, The Federalist, often writers refer to transgenderism as the promotion of child genital mutilation rather than calling it transgenderism. So I'd like each of you to comment further concerning the power of language on shaping people's views of these issues, and then finally point us to the phrasings that you think most honestly and most lovingly address those challenging topics as we address various audiences along the way.
Well, lying to someone is not being loving. So if you use euphemisms, what that does is a lie. A euphemism is a nicer word that covers up the reality of what is actually happening. And that is a lie to someone, and as a Christian, we shouldn't do that. Especially when what we're talking about covering up is child genital mutilation. I mean, I don't recommend that people do this because you can probably guess why. I don't recommend that people do this, but if you need to confirm for yourself that that is exactly what it is, you can go online and find pictures of the procedure. There are children in the audience, so I don't think I'm going to give details about it, but we're talking about stripping off human flesh, amputating healthy organs, and giving people lifelong medical conditions. If you read some of the testimonies of people who have undergone these procedures, the wounds never close in some cases. Imagine living your entire life with an open wound in your genitals. It is not loving to lie about what that is, especially when it causes more people to damage themselves that way. So I think about the transgender issue as being actually very similar to the abortion one in the level of violence that it does to the human person. Obviously, abortion ends in death. Transgender, I have a hard time with the language, right? Because it's not medical care. Medical care helps people heal. It damages them, right? So it's mutilation. It's damaging their body. So medical mutilation of children, of anyone, is, that's what it is. So that's why it's the words that we use, because if you cannot clearly use words that accurately describe things, then their understanding is clouded, and we need to be speaking clearly and understanding clearly in order to take the right actions.
Yeah, and the importance of words, I use a couple images. One in particular, I'm a big fan of filled donuts. I love donuts. I wish I didn't, but I do, so I'm admitting it publicly. But it's a weakness. Yeah, and I don't know what it is about pastors' gatherings. They always have this, like they're just baiting us. But anyway. Yeah, exactly. So I'm actually going somewhere with this. Those filled donuts, it actually matters what's on the inside. Okay, so if you ever had this moment where you're going down the donut line and you're looking at where I think that one's filled, but it really matters to me what's on the inside. Like, turn it over. That's jelly. I don't like jelly, or whatever. You have your favorites. Like you don't want. Once you touch it, you should take it, right? That's the rule. But you don't. It matters what's on the inside. My point is, it matters what's on the inside of words. Words are like filled donuts, all right? And it matters what's on the inside. And you have to ask oftentimes, because you mentioned euphemisms. This I believe there's a spiritual battle at work here, and we are being deceived by words that are filled with things that are false or toxic or just harmful, and I think there are consequences for that. I think it was C.S. Lewis who called it verbicide, the murder of words. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say when words are murdered, people get hurt. So I think one of the callings as Christians is to call a thing what it is. Now, yes, we need to be loving and circumspect in how we speak. Like the goal is not to be intentionally offensive. But if the truth is offensive, the truth is offensive. We don't have to be offensive as people. But call a thing what it is. It does matter what's in that word, just like it matters what's in your donut, right? And I think if we understand that going in, we won't be so deceived by some of the euphemisms that, I'll tell you what, the world is good at euphemisms, at things that are, like you mentioned the abortion thing, and I'll only use this example, but they have a term called products of conception room. That's a horrible euphemism. And you mentioned children being present. I won't tell you what I can't even use words to describe what that means. But I can tell you it's a euphemism for evil. And so we need to be sensitive to asking the question, what's in that donut? I think if you think that way, that would be a helpful way to think.
Words are huge. They're remarkably powerful. They have incredible opportunities to create relationships, sustain relationships, and destroy relationships. We should never be guilty of speaking falsely, but our words need to be wrapped in the nature of our relationship with someone else. In part, we have to ask if our words are being intended to judge, to educate, to persuade, to discourage, to humiliate. Words have purposes, and going beyond the simple phrases, we very often need to look beyond the simple words to saying, what is the nature of the relationship that I hope to have with this person after I've spoken my words? If my words are angry, if my words are perceived as being toxic, it's unlikely I'll ever have any opportunity to connect in a meaningful way with that person again. One of the opportunities we have, even with the people who are on the other side of the net, is to continue to be in relationship, or we lose our capacity to exert any influence over them whatsoever. I've often made the observation that there are some difficult people with whom I disagree about many important things. And if I were to simply go into those relationships swinging an axe and yelling, "Hi-ya!" and taking it on and unloading on them, it wouldn't be very effective. Over time, what I've discovered is that if it's not a matter that's acute or emergent, it's often useful to perceive oneself as the tugboat, going up alongside the larger ship and continuing to nudge, continuing to speak the truth, continuing to exert influence, continuing to change the direction of a person's perceptions. And if we use our language to break relationships, we may lose the opportunity to make the relationships more open to the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Thank you all, and we're ready now for your next question, sir.
God's word says that we should love all, including those who do not show love to us and those who have sinned against us. So when it comes to the gender identity and transgender issue and dealing with someone who loves their sin, how do we show them that we hate their sin yet still love them, especially since telling them this can often make them hostile?
That sounds like a great pastoral care issue.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so funny. I thought, oh, good, she'll answer first, so I'll have time to think. Yes, I think you've asked a great question. I have to admit, I think when we all come down to this, a lot of us love our sin. It may be a different one, but I just think we have to be sober enough to say that there are sins I struggle to separate myself from because my flesh loves them. And I think knowing that allows me to come alongside a person and, I used the hole in the boat image before, but I just have a very profound sense of the holes that are my own boat. And when I come alongside a friend, a brother, a sister, I need to come with that sort of humility, but also, the great gospel message is that Christ bled and died for us, right? So I don't think anybody should be surprised to discover there's sin in somebody's life, or even to acknowledge it as sin. Now, I know it's going to be difficult because in our culture, we're trying to call something that is sin not sin. So everything in our culture seems to be about affirming person in their sin. What I see, though, is in this particular, like the sexualized alphabet, like we have carved out a special place for these sins and said, these have a special sacred place in our culture and we cannot question these. We have other sins that's okay to question, like you can call someone out for child abuse. That one's publicly acceptable. You can that's just flat out evil. Like we can all get behind that. There was a book a while back, I think it was by a gentleman named Jerry Bridges. I just remember the title, Respectable Sins. In other words, like we've set up certain sins that we respect in the church. I think we just need to be aware that this is one in a list of sins. It's just one. So I don't want to make it seem like this is somehow the unforgivable sin, or we're setting this up as a special category, nor does it deserve special protection from criticism. It's just one other hole in someone's boat. And so speaking that word of truth, speaking that word of, brother, walk with me as a fellow broken sinner who comes before the altar, who comes before the font, who comes before to receive the forgiveness of the Lord. Come, let us go and receive the gifts of God and the gifts of mercy and forgiveness together, right? So I think maybe that message of walking together to receive the gifts that God gives is really what we need to be focusing on, but certainly not like picking out certain categories of sins as worse than others. Yes, certain sins have, just like certain rocks make bigger splashes, and certain sins can have bigger ripples in a person's life and affect other people more dramatically than others. Nonetheless, we take all of those before the throne of God for forgiveness. So now have you had time to think? I'm going to give it back to you. All right.
In part, I heard the question addressing, in addition to that, the nature of the relationship that a person has one with another. And from time to time, we hear another speak a sin which we would consider to be unthinkable, impossible. To us, it seems horrific. In the world of psychotherapy, it's not unusual for people to use that office as a different type of confessional, if you will, to speak things of which they are ashamed, to speak things that have caused them to feel guilty or great remorse. And often when we can see another person's remorse, it's easier to deal with the sin, respond to it in love, and see the remorse as a clear desire to be restored. It's when we see people who sin blatantly, who sin again and again, who sin without remorse, that sometimes there's a temptation to say, for heaven's sakes, you're just impossible, and to lose the relationship. The relationship is one of the things we're given by God as a remarkably powerful instrument, and when we're frustrated, it's our frustration. When we are angry, it's our anger. And yes, we did have a Savior who cleaned out the money changers from the temple in righteous rage. We're not in a place where we can feel righteous rage very much. And so often when people say, well, how do you respond? First and foremost, if I'm offended by a sin, if I see a sin as egregious, sometimes our first response has to be one of prayer, one of reflection. When a therapist closes the door to the waiting room and an individual with open heart before them and the contents of their heart are spilling out into the conference table and questions are asked or sins are revealed, one of the first responses that sometimes a good psychologist needs to make is a prayer, confident that God will equip you thoroughly for what it is you need, the words you need, the patience you need, the insight you need. And so I guess I would offer you the perspective that sometimes dealing with sin starts with restraint of our own responses, which wouldn't be particularly helpful. and instead being confident and expecting that God will bless the relationship in ways that can move forward in some constructive ways.
I'm just going to tell a story about my husband that makes me look bad. So a couple of years ago, we had this neighbor, gay man, militantly so, but wouldn't stop coming over to our house to talk to my husband. Chain smoker, had an annoying dog that he never cleaned up after, always seemed to come right at dinner time. Was, for me, the craziest time of the day. I found him super, super annoying, and whenever he showed up, I basically hid and let my husband chat with him for hours and hours that my husband didn't have, and that sometimes I resented were taken away from our family. And he would also, he increased the drama in my husband's life immensely, like from 5 to 500, accusing him of crazy things, including adultery, never happened, getting him, sicking the city weed inspector on our back alley after some made-up offense, just like it never ended. It was, for years and years it was like this, but we invited him to our Thanksgivings, to our Easters. He would come and irritate our guests. So I really, I would put up with this guy. I didn't say, get rid of Jay. But, I was like, Jesus, why? Just why? Well, my husband kept, whenever he was not accusing my husband of things, which, my husband usually would say, when you're ready to have a conversation and treat me like a friend, let me know. But until then, I'm not answering your crazy text messages. So that went on like that for years and years and years. Lived a couple houses down from us. Jay, because of the way that he's lived his life, very sick man, would be taken. He had cardiac arrest multiple times a year. Whenever the ambulance, he was on death watch. Whenever, the ambulance would show up, we'd run over there and try to hold his hand, while they're getting him in there. So, because his family wouldn't talk to him because he's not a pleasant person to live with. And so I'm not saying, none of that was easy, It was all annoying. My husband got nothing beneficial out of his relationship with Jay. It was a drag in every single way, but he loved him. He would spend hours up late at night around our, yard campfire, talking with him about Jesus, about the Bible, about how God doesn't hate, Jay because he's gay, but he can't sin like that, over and over again. He'd get called a bigot hundreds and hundreds of times, right? But Jay kept coming back, and the end of that story is one of my favorite ones that I'm never, ever, ever going to forget. Because when Jay died in the hospital finally about a year and a half ago, my husband was there holding his hand, and he was making his confession of Christianity. And I always laugh now when I think of Jay, because if Jesus can save Jay, he can save anybody. So now every time, I have other family members and other people in my life who, they are not Christians, and I want them to be in eternity with me, right? And it's very distressing sometimes to think about it. But I think if Jesus is going to, get Jay, he can get this person too. And so I don't have any tactics, there's no tactic, but if you're willing to suffer for somebody else, and again, I don't believe that your willingness to suffer is going to be a magic pill that saves anybody, right? Jesus does all the saving. However, if he puts an obnoxious human being in your life who keeps coming back and arguing with you about the Bible, maybe go ahead and keep arguing, and you never know where it could go. Maybe it goes nowhere, right? But that was just a crazy experience that really taught me not to be, it makes me now think that I should be kinder to people, right? I don't like, he was a chain smoker. Every time he came over or my husband went to his house, we'd have to wash everything because it all smelled like smoke, right? Super annoying guy, but he's going to be in heaven, and I can't wait, right? So, so in terms of loving people, it's hard to love people. It sucks, right? You have to give up your sleep, your money, your time, your energy, your dinner, with your family, all kinds of things. that you really shouldn't have to give up. But that's how to love people. And often I think people with, like you said, this is not the worst sin of all. There's all kinds of sins. But that's what it means to be a friend, is to love someone, no matter what. And that's what Jesus has done to us. So if God puts someone in your life like that, you don't have to put up with their crap, but you also don't have to write them off and shut the door every time they show up because they smell bad.
I have a question that kind of concerns the first speaker, but I'd like to address it to the whole community. And it is, how would you start or have a conversation with someone who denies that reality does in fact have edges, or that there is a sort of objective truth about the issue?
You could drop a bowling ball in their foot. I mean, the thing is, if you deny reality, you can't live. I mean, you just want to ask some of these obvious questions about, if I drop this bowling, is you okay if I drop this bowling ball in your foot, because we're going to deny the reality of gravity? The moral law is just as fixed as the gravitational law. But let me help maybe unpack this a little bit more. Why is it that thieves don't want you to steal from them? Because reality is a certain way, isn't it? Why is it that liars don't like it when you lie to them? Because reality really is a certain way, right? Why is it that people who cheat don't want you to cheat with them? Why? Because it really is a certain way. And you could just go to Romans 1, where Paul talks about the issue here is not the issue is we're suppressing the truth, right? So we're telling lies, and part of our call is simply lovingly to expose those lies. If we deny reality, let me put it this way: reality has a way of asserting itself. It just does, and those would be some of the questions I might ask to help the person see. No, you do believe in reality. You're denying it in certain areas for your own purposes, but you're trying to hold it up in other areas where it'll serve you well, and that's inconsistent. So that's how I'd start. Do you want to add to that either way? Yep. Go ahead.
Take a quick swing at it. Very often individuals who find themselves in psychotherapeutic settings have difficulty understanding reality, acknowledging reality, interacting with reality. And some of these people have legitimate psychological diagnoses which prevent them from seeing life as it really is with sufficient clarity to take appropriate actions. So part of a person's issue maybe there's a personality disorder which prevents them from understanding, seeing, acknowledging things that everyone else sees. Sometimes that can be corrected, and sometimes it can't. For individuals who aren't dealing with psychotherapeutic issues, reality is something that you point to again and again, not harshly, not unkindly, not in a judging way, but always with a desire to teach and to hopefully extend a person's capacity to see what exists beyond their immediate ability to grab and understand. You point to what's beyond often enough, and you engage them in conversations with others, which can often be helpful, which is why therapists who have groups are so fortunate. They need not be the only voice who makes the point again and again. And when people hear reality expressed by loving people over time, very often they can make adjustments in their own perceptions as well.
Thank you. We do have time for another question.
So my question is for Dr. Yahnke, as you're a psychologist. My own mother is a psychologist as well. She's been since I was really, really little. And she has a very hard time separating her work life from her family life. And as I've gotten older, I've actually begun to sort of accept that and be happy with the way that she talks and interacts with me as I'm maturing and getting older. She used to deal with very little children through play therapy and that sort of work. But now she mainly focuses on those who've been traumatized. And she would often share with me a lot of different, what do you want to call it? I guess, rules for psychologists for their work. And this talk has really sort of opened my eyes to how corrupt it seems that some of these rules aren't actually being followed. For instance, which situations obligate therapists to break confidentiality? I actually have it on my phone because I thought of it. Detailed planning of future suicide attempts, other concrete sides of suicidal intent, planned violence towards others, planned future child abuse, formerly committed child abuse, experiencing child abuse, and expecting to experience future child abuse. More than half of those are dealing with child abuse, so what's going on?
Hello. What's going on is that there are ethical kinds of guidelines and strategies to which psychologists commit, and confidentiality is chief among them, or no one would really have any reason whatsoever to see a psychologist. The problem is who is defining the words. If someone says to me, I've been thinking about hurting myself every single day, and tonight I think I'm going to do it, I'm a mandated reporter, as are pastors and teachers and social workers and all kinds of individuals who interact with children are mandated to report. If, for example, in my vocabulary, I regard someone who's going to move forward with puberty blockers as abusive, and I report it to an agency who says, no, that's not abusive, you have a responsibility as a psychologist, your ethical responsibility is to assist them in transitioning, we have an absolute plateau where there's no progress that's going to be made. I see a danger and want for someone to be cared for. The agency to which I'm required to report says, good job, psychologist, help them do what they need to do. So if you're not dealing with terms that are shared by reporter and receiving institution, you'll never make any kind of progress in reporting the abuse of, say, for example, transgender transitioning. The reporting has become so difficult that in a number of states, for example, if a child were to share with his teacher, I'm starting to receive puberty-blocking drugs, my mom and dad don't know about it. Many states you don't even need a parent's consent to move ahead with puberty-blocking drugs. If parents were to oppose it, children could be placed into foster care, so their medical rights would be protected. So we exist at a fruit basket upset time when abuse means different things to different people. And sadly, it's not allowing us to protect some of the children we would like to protect. And it's preventing parents from even knowing what their child's intentions are. So the system is horribly, horribly dysfunctional.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
And now running the 30-yard dash.
Mr. Moderator, do you want to take one more question? This time is short.
We'll take one brief question, please.
Okay. I'm Alan Quist, retired prof from Bethany Lutheran College. I have a question for Joy Pullmann. Joy, first let me just quickly mention, as you're speaking, I was so excited I could hardly stay in my chair. And I'm not easily impressed, as my friends know, but thank you. Thank you. I'd like to ask the big picture question, and that is this. You point out how transgenderism is an application of cultural Marxism, which it clearly is, also called neo-Marxism. As you know, Antonio Gramsci is probably the main intellectual godfather of cultural Marxism. Paulo Freire is a player. But anyway, both Freire and Gramsci say that the end game of what they're talking about, is you have to control education, you have to indoctrinate the population for the Marxist revolution to succeed. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. What's behind this are the demons. But on the earthly level, are we seeing what Gramsci and Freire said had to happen? Is that what we're seeing?
Oh, all of the people who are behind not only communism but early childhood education, such as Froebels and Montessori. And there's a great new book about that by Dr. Thomas Korchak, Serpents in the Classroom. It documents that the people who were behind that were openly, again, like in my talk, the cultural Marxists openly say they want to systematically destroy, change, subvert. The people behind early childhood and early schooling away from parents said they did that on purpose to take away the parents' religion from the children. And so I call it family separation, right? So I think our Lutheran and Christian forefathers were very wise about that, and they knew that the children needed to be educated properly within their homes and their families and their churches, and not that given away to anyone else because of how important that is. And that is why Lutherans in particular, but also Catholics, many other kinds of Christianity, not American evangelicals, but Lutherans have a very strong history of parochial education. The first thing they would do when they migrated, they'd build a church, then they build a school. And they, for many, many decades, that's why still it's fading, it has been fading, but it's been culturally normal for Lutherans to put their children in the parish school, because they understand that the public schools teach a different religion than the one they want to pass on to their children. So a lot of Americans have not only lost that, but I think there's some willful blindness there because of, again, the costs that it imposes on your Disney vacations, on buying new clothes and a mocha latte and all the rest in order to sacrifice to provide that education privately that the state is taxing the money away from you to use to take your children away from you.
Thank you. And thank you all, Pastor Connor and Dr. Yahnke and Mrs. Pullmann, for your presentations today. The Center for Apologetics and Worldviews intends to continue this annual pattern of conferences as well as sponsoring other programs and publications. Our next conference is set for June 21 and 22 on the tail end of the Synod Convention, and more information will be posted to our website shortly concerning that. I'd also like to remind you to complete the survey that is at the end of your conference packet today, and you can return that at the table where you picked it up earlier. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and above all, let us thank the Lord for blessing us with opportunities like this to present evidence, to critique worldviews, dangerous worldviews in many cases, to search the scriptures, and to engage each other in conversations, to engage unbelievers in conversations, leading to the gospel proclamation that forgiveness is in Christ for everyone. Let us share that as we leave today. In his name, farewell.